make sure that we are live. Okay, so give me 1 second now. Da, 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 da. Mm. Nope. Nope. Oh, there we are. All right. All right. The live is working. Woohoo. Half a day. Half a day todos Samsung Guana Hudzong Estigi un nuevo na episode Fanachu. This is another episode of Fanachu. We are almost to the end of 2024. Wow, what a weird, strange year it has been. Hafatatat Mano Hamzu, are you all okay? Are you all okay? I hope you're doing okay. But we are ending Fanatsu on a high note this year. We are ending, even though it may seem like in a lot of ways, the world, there's a lot of crazy things happening around the world. There's a lot of people struggling, and this is absolutely true. And in 2025, we will be tackling a lot of those things through our episodes. What we have been trying to do as we come to an end on this podcast is that we have been trying to celebrate some indigenous filmmakers. I had the honor of going to the Hawaii International Film Festival earlier this year and hosting a panel for Firelight Media, Pacific Islanders in Communication, that featured filmmakers that were part of a program, a cohort for the Homegrown series, a part of and apart from. And this cohort featured filmmakers from Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, Hawaii, and Guam. And it was an amazing crew of films. They were all premiered at the Hawaii International Film Festival earlier this year. Short documentaries tackling all sorts of issues of indigeneity, community activism, cultural identity, cultural loss, environmental destruction related to militarization, political belonging, relationships to the United States, colonization, decolonization, all of these things, language loss, language revitalization, all of these things came out in these films. And so I've invited a number of those filmmakers to come onto the Fanachu podcast as we end this year that was 2024. And so I'm very excited to have with me one of those filmmakers who premiered at the Hawaii International Film Festival earlier this year, not a U.S. citizen, John Niko Pātū, who not a U.S. citizen, which out of a lot of films that were featured there, which struck very differently because I think but this is why I always appreciate we had Tapao Dan Anga on the podcast earlier this year, and I always appreciate bringing on voices from American Samoa to another territory in the Pacific connected to the United States to talk about our histories, to talk about where we are today, to talk about what we want for the future of our people, but also to talk about our political realities as well. And so not a US citizen was very challenging because I think for a lot of people who watched those films, a lot of people who think about US territories, the assumption is, well, you should make them states or make them full US citizens or bring them into the American fold. And the truth of the matter, though, is that one of the ways that you should solve the problem of US colonialism is not to unilaterally decide what the people in US colonies want, but maybe you should listen and ask the people in those colonies, what do they actually want for their future? Because the problem with colonialism, the long list of problems with colonialism is extraction of resources, taking of lands, the sort of the forced assimilation, sort of the degradation of culture, all these things. But at a fundamental level today, the denial of self-determination, the denial of self-governance, these are very, very important things. And so John's film really kind of, amidst a lot of other films, really hit that issue head on, because American Samoans, in contrast to the other islanders that are part of territories connected to the United States, they are U.S. nationals. And so, but filmmaking is only one of the things that John does. And so I'm very, very happy he's also involved in language revitalization. And so we've got so many things that we can talk about today. And so thank you so much, John, for joining on this podcast. Hafade. Aloha talofa, hello.
Tarufalava, yeah.
All
Wala
right.
sila ingon faftai le tua mani ona matu fi tatu fata si malisua ale fo mai o te me ko te wako tarufalava.
Oh, thank you. Sidus Masi, thank you. And so um I want to give you a chance to go ahead and just introduce yourself. Tell us, and especially because one of the things that for Fanachu is focused on Chamorro experiences out here in the Marianas, but I always want to use it to connect us to other islands in the Pacific and especially other territories. And so, you know, please introduce yourself and feel free to introduce American Samoa to us, because I think for a lot of people in the Marianas, just because we come from a Pacific island, it does not mean that we are familiar with all other Pacific islands at all. So please go ahead and introduce yourself and introduce sort of American Samoa as you know it to us.
Yeah, faftai Malia Manoa. Thank you for the opportunity to be on this podcast. So I thank you, Dr. Devako, for the opportunity. Um, American Samoa is, well, I guess it's kind of hard to describe. It's very complex. I guess we'll first start off. Actually, I'll introduce myself first. My name is John. Um, Niko Pātū. A lot of people call me Niko. It's my nickname. So you guys get confused if I go by either John or Niko. I was born here in American Samoa a while back. Um, so I was born here. I was born as a U.S. national. Um, and then my family moved to Hawaii back in the 90s. Um, so I also grew up in Hawaii. I actually went to school there uh, in for elementary, high school, and my undergrad and graduate degrees. So for the past several years, I've been working on my PhD in Hawaiian and Indigenous language revitalization at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. So that's my primary work is in Indigenous language revitalization. Um, I also did my master's at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where I focused on Pacific Island studies. And so that's where um, my interest in this issue regarding American Samoa citizenship, but largely looking at the issue of um, nationalism within the context of Samoa and American Samoa. And so for my master's thesis, I kind of looked at the concept of the nation state in regard to the Samoan situation. As many of you know, there are two Samoas. They're two distinct political entities. Um, some people get confused as to why they're two Samoas, and it has to do with our colonial history. Similar in many ways to how Guam and the rest of the Marianas Islands um, were separated. So our situation is a little bit unique. Um, and I guess we'll just start off from there. The reason why there are two Samoas is um, because of the geopolitical climate of the time in um, the Samoan archipelago was kind of uh, was no exemption from all the political maneuvering of the European and American powers at the time, right? The late, especially the mid to late 1800s, when there was uh, as many different places were being colonized by different European and American powers. So sorry, they didn't have a map of American Samoa, but if you guys are familiar, the eastern side of the Samoan archipelago is a U.S. territory, and then the other side um today is an independent nation state. So it used to be called Western Samoa, but now it's just called Samoa. So back in 1997, they dropped the Western, um, ironically, and then um, yeah, actually, our government here was a little bit upset when it happened. Um, and so there was a lot of, well, I wouldn't say there was some drama with the naming of the islands. But now today, most people, when we say Samoa, I mean, we could refer to Samoa as a whole, but we normally refer to it as the independent state of Samoa. So if you guys can see the map here, thank you, Dr. Bivakwa, for providing the map. So this is one of the standard maps that everybody sees when they first are introduced to Samoa. You can see that it's the group of islands. The eastern side is called American Samoa. It's claimed as a U.S. territory. And then, so American Samoa comprises two main island groups, so Tutuila, where the capital Pago Pago, and then we have the Manua Islands uh, on the eastern side. So the easternmost part of the Samoan archipelago is Manua. So colloquially, American Samoa is also known as Tutuila and Manua, even though there are other islands that also are part of the territory, including Swains Island, or also known as Olohenga, and then there is also Rosetta. So this whole area is um, what comprises American Samoa. And so essentially in 1900, Samoa as a people were divided into Germany took over uh, Poland and Hawaii, which are these two the bigger islands, and then the U.S. Primarily took over Tutuila and Native Manua, so the eastern side. So as you can see, Samoa was, or what used to be called Western Samoa, Poland, Hawaii, uh, um, and much more land. And so the Germans wanted that side of the archipelago primarily for their plantations. And then the United States wanted uh, uh, Eastern Samoa, um, primarily the island of Tutuila for its harbor. And so it was used as a naval coaling station for several decades. And Tutuila, American Samoa, and initially we weren't even called American Samoa. It was the formal name was the naval station of Tutuila. So it's in relation to um, uh, the Navy taking over that harbor, which was used to dock ships, but also as a coaling station. And so that's the primary reason that the United States wanted it. Was American Samoa is the only possession or territory south of the equator. So it was the United States wanted it primarily as a strategic military uh, location on an outpost. So um, yeah, so that's
Thank
kind of the colonial history of
you.
why there are two Samoas.
Thank you so much for this because I think for so many people this provides a lot of historical context for the separated Samoas, and then even, even for me who is somewhat familiar with this history, this helps me understand it a little bit more. Now, one thing that I want to hear more about from you though, because I know that Samoan language, you've mentioned that this is something that you have been working on. For example, you have an Instagram page called Learn Samoan, that you're very active on, and that you've been doing work in the community around Samoan language in the diaspora, in Hawaii, for example. And so, can you talk to us, because this is something, for example, in for Chamorros, um, whether if you are in the diaspora, then the language statistics are, of course, very, very low. If you are in Guam, then the language statistics are better, but low. If you are in the Northern Islands, then your language fluency is better, but still declining. So kind of everywhere Chamorros are, the language is declining, but the diaspora is much, much lower. But then depending on where you are in the Marianas, there's a higher chance that you can speak, you have more fluency and so on. Is What is the language fluency map for Samoans? Is it sort of that, is it strong in the diaspora, or is it not strong in the diaspora? Is it strong in the islands? Like in American Samoa, do young people still speak the language very well, or is it declining? Can you give us a sense of where the language health is at for Samoa?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's it depends on the location. So obviously in Samoa and American Samoa, the language is much more, it's much stronger. Um, it's still the first language of the majority of people on both sides. Um, I think in the census or some of the census, it still was at 90%, or that's what most people responded to, that they spoke Samoan. Um, Although actual fluency, proficiency was a whole different question, but more than 90% of the people reported that they speak Samoan, which is really high. And that also has to do with a lot of the historical context as well, um, especially in relation to our colonial history. And so I think that's one of the things that people kind of conflate when they think about colonialism across different places, right? That it was really drastic. And for many places it was. In the Samoan context, it wasn't, we didn't undergo, or we did suffer physical genocide like how in many other places. The majority of the population in both Samoas is still over 80%. So most of the people are still the native people, and that's why our language is still relatively strong. And that's why most people are Samoan. Most people speak Samoan, and most people still practice Samoan culture. Um, and then to contextualize it, right, um we didn't go through a lot of the settler colonialism that other places went through as well. Um, I think partly because of the remoteness of our islands, we were never really destined for white settlement, like other places where, um, eventually other colonial powers just took over. That wasn't really the case for Samoa or American Samoa. And so that's why we still have most people being Samoan or being native Samoan in Samoa. And so that's why our language is relatively strong. Um, Now, in terms of the diaspora, and so this is what's changed the Samoan situation a lot because, you know, I guess before it was the 60s, I think. In this, so there were several major outways migrations of Samoans outside of Samoa. in American Samoa. Part of it was the military. There were a lot of migrations to Hawaii and the US continent. So before the 60s, right, most Samoans lived in Samoa, American Samoa. Uh, Today in 2024, I think about 70 to 80% of Samoans don't live in American Samoa anymore. Most of them live in the US continent. So currently the population of Samoans in American Samoa is about 40,000. In Hawaii alone, there are 40,000 Samoans now. Uh, California, there are 60,000. And in total, there are about 250,000 Samoans, at least, according to the latest census, that are living within the United States. That's not including American Samoa. So Samoans in the diaspora outnumber Samoans in American Samoa at least 5 to 1. And so the language situation has shifted uh, dramatically to the diaspora. And so in Hawaii, and so the latest census language survey, um, out of the 40,000 Samoans that live in Hawaii, uh, about 12,000 or about 30% speak Samoan. Um, so that's really alarming, I think. Um, for school-age children, ages 5 to 17, the survey back in 2016 for the Hawaii Language Survey, uh, less than 5% of the population of Samoan children spoke Samoan, which is also really alarming. So there hasn't been any, that is from my perspective, any real policy or movement to kind of address the problem, um, especially in the US because we're much more dispersed than in other diasporas. Like in New Zealand, I think their revitalization efforts are far ahead because they have their own government ministry. But for us in the US, our government is basically the American Samoa government. Um, it's our own sort of tribal government. Um, I know I probably shouldn't. It's not the same situation. But yeah, so that's kind of like how the language situation is because of the shift to the diaspora outnumbers those living back in our homeland by 5 to 1 at least.
Thank
I
you.
believe it's critically endangered. I mean, I
Mm.
believe it's endangered. Yeah.
No, thank you for that perspective, especially because you know it's for the language statistics that you shared. I mean, that's for tomorrow's. We wish that it was that high that our people spoke in the islands. It's much lower in terms of the fluency, but and then at this point, our diaspora is the majority of our people. But it I don't think it's as high as that though, in terms of the amount that are away. But and so one of the things that I wanted to ask though, because somebody had messaged, they said, is but in schools in American Samoa, is the instruction in English or is any of it done in Samoan?
Thank you for the question. So at the preschool level, most of the instruction is in Samoan because most of the kids that go through the programs are Samoan. Um, so at the preschool level, so um, the early childhood education programs, um, their primary medium of instruction is Samoan. Um, but K through 12 is primarily in English. Actually, so the law in American Samoa for several decades, uh, it was mandated that all instruction was supposed to be in English, and that Samoan was primarily to be used to help understand concepts in English. Um, so that was the policy for several decades. It wasn't until 2022, in his most recent administration, that the law was changed. There were several uh, there are several major proponents of changing the laws. So people that have been in the Samoan language revitalization movement, they've been pushing for it because people were starting to notice that there was a major language shift. So back in 2 years ago, 2022, the government and American Samoa created the Samoan Language Commission. So part of their uh, work is to uh, assess the state of the language in American Samoa, but also to um, introduce different policies that would help to reverse the language shift in American Samoa. I think that's one of the things that we kind of don't have as well documented is all the data. Sorry, I hope that answers the question. But because this American system was kind of imposed on American Samoa, uh, there's always there's been an emphasis towards English. And in Samoan is more has always kind of been on the back burner. It wasn't as a priority as English. Um, so I think it was primarily a transitional bilingual program where they would transition the students from speaking Samoan into English. Samoan was primarily an elective class in the secondary schools. And so that was kind of the trend for the last several decades was to transition into English. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so what are some of the plans that you have in terms of some language revitalization projects in the diaspora? I know when we last met, you were talking about possibly a school, right? An immersion school.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Definitely that's been part of my mission. Um, and I guess to introduce also some of my background aside from um, the political topics. So I initially got into this so I was a part-time lecturer actually at the University of Hawaii at Mavo when I used to teach elementary and intermediate Samoan. So that's how I got into the whole language realization moment was growing. My siblings and we all grew up in Hawaii, and out of the six of us, only I um, speak Samoan. So that was for me personally, it was kind of a mission to help revive our languages within our families. And so that's why initially I didn't want to go into teaching, but we all kind of um, get pulled into it. Probably our ancestors pushing us to help our people. So um, personally, my journey, I kind of went backwards. So I started teaching at the university level, and then I actually taught at Hawaiian immersion school for 5 years. And so that's how I got into the whole immersion school movement. It was because I've been through that system and I see that it works and I know that it will work for our people too. Um, Going through different language programs and teaching in different contexts. Um, I think the most effective, especially for the diaspora, is we really need our own schools. And so working at a Hawaiian immersion school, uh, aside from working for the schools, I was actually doing a teacher training program um, at Kaka'olokeani Kolani to the Hawaiian Language College at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. So um, um, for some of you who may be familiar with the Hawaiian language revitalization movement, um, a lot of it came out of the University of Hawaii at Hilo. So if you guys are familiar with the Punana the Pulakea Puli, that that kind of came out of the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And so that's part of the reason why I chose to do my PhD at the University of Hawaii at Hilo, because of their strong focus on the Hawaiian language revitalization movement and utilizing immersion schools. So I taught at Kikulo Kamakau, um, which is a public charter school in Kaneohe, Oahu. So I was there for 5 years, and it was interesting because that's also where I did my teacher practicum for the year. And so part of the reason why I like charter schools is because there's a lot of autonomy within the school system to teach different subjects and to kind of innovate, develop your own curriculum that was separate from, the mandated state curriculum and the testing that they required everyone to do. So that's why I'm a big proponent of having our own immersion schools. Um, I I believe that it's going to be the most effective way to saving our languages. Um, Going through the system, going through the programs, I was really convinced that, or actually, I'm really convinced that it is one of the ways that we are going to address language shift within our communities. And there's so many different opportunities, different ways to address the language shift. But for me, I think that this will be the most effective. So the last couple of years since I've left the school, I've been developing um, the curriculum, but also putting in different applications for different grants and different programs to help build and develop the school. So I did that for the last year in Hawaii. So currently I'm in American Samoa right now, exploring different options. I think initially my focus is to develop it and start the pilot program in Hawaii. Um, but I think within the last couple months, um, so I spoke. Sorry, I don't mean to jump all over. So I spoke with the executive director of the American Samoan Language Commission. Um, and so so one of the goals of the commission is to assess the state of the language. So back in 2001, American Samoa had conducted a survey. So that was the most recent survey here in American Samoa, which is more than 2 decades. Um, so back in 2001, they said that about 67% of families regularly use Samoan in the household. Um, so the commission hasn't published a report yet. But just talking with the executive director, she said that it had dropped to about 50% in American Samoa. So it was really an eye opener for me because my focus was always towards the diaspora because that's where the critical need is much more present. But I think uh, I think it's also needed here in our own homeland as well. So that's what I'm kind of looking into here is to develop a Samoan immersion charter school here in American Samoa. I think one of the problems that we did have in the past year in American Samoa is the previous director of education had introduced the bilingual program, a bilingual, or I think it was dual immersion. And so I thought it was a good program, but there was some backlash from members of the community and even some legislators. Um, I think because people really didn't um, think that our language was that endangered, but people wanted the English only curriculum. Uh, didn't see the need as much to teach Samoan or utilize Samoan as a language of instruction. But I think the attitudes are changing more recently, and people are starting to realize, we have some issues that need to be addressed. And
Mm.
yeah, this is an important moment in our lives and our work and yeah, a lot of work needs to be done.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that very sobering reality, I think, because one of the things that I've, reckoned with, at least in the Chamorro example, is, growing up, and it's still around today, is this idea that always the culture or the language is being lost over there by our cousins in the States. They don't know it. But the problem, of course, is that sometimes people do that gesture to precisely to cover over the fact that they are losing it themselves. It makes them so they and for the but I always remembered, because I remember even when I was younger and I couldn't, it was so funny because I would like sit with my grandparents would be at the table, and my grandfather would be complaining to my grandmother, and my grandfather would be like, "Oh my goodness." My grandfather had a shop because he was a blacksmith, and he would sell his tools, and he would say, "Oh, you won't believe these chamorros that came in from California. Oh, they don't know the culture. They can't speak the language." And then my grandmother would say, "But your grandchildren can't speak the language." And we didn't teach them any of the language. And then and then my grandfather would be like, "Oh, those chamorros in Arizona, I can't believe them." And it was always so funny because it was like you're focusing on how it's being lost over there, but you focus on that precisely so that you don't have to reckon with the fact that it's being lost around you too. And so I it's something that we're getting better, at least in the Chamorro context, about dealing with and doing something about. But even to your point about an immersion school in Samoa, for us, I help a group of volunteers who run an adult immersion program for the Chamorro language, and we've had it twice in Guam, and it's a struggle because many people in Guam who, even though most people in Guam can't speak Chamorro, most Chamorros in Guam can't speak Chamorro already, there is this feeling that it's not needed here, even though so many people would benefit from these resources. But at least in the diaspora, there is a recognition that we need those things because we don't have anything here. We don't have anything else. So it is good though, to see that, that you recognize that it may be happening in Samoa too, that the language loss is already happening, even if some people may not realize it. Some or Oh wow. But and so I do want to share real fast, and I wanted to get your comment on it because somebody was already asking about. Somebody was asking because I shared this in my language chats because I teach language, and I have my students ask you, why did you start this, or how did this page Learn Samoan get started? So I shared this with them for the your Learn Samoan Instagram page. And so how did this get started? And so
Thank you.
what
Actually,
is your inspiration for it?
it's an interesting story. Actually, I started back in 2018, and at the time, I was doing my practicum for the teacher training program that I was doing. And so at the time, I actually didn't focus on. So for most of my career, by then I was teaching Samoan and I was in the Samoan community. But back in 2018, because I was teaching in a Hawaiian immersion charter school and I was doing my teaching practicum later on, I didn't actually have I wasn't immersed in the Samoan community because I was in the Hawaiian immersion school. And so what I wanted to do was okay, academy my community. I mean, um, I was also serving the Hawaiian immersion community at the time, but I also wanted to have a platform to share uh, Samoan language content because I was transitioning out of teaching at the university at that time. And so I wasn't teaching Samoan um, in the community or in the schools. And so I kind of developed this page. Um, so it's a diverse range of topics. I know I was supposed to be teaching Samoan primarily, um, but I was also utilizing this platform as a teaching tool for my classes. And so my teaching practicum at the time, I was doing it in both elementary and high school because I was also, so my license is actually in social studies. And so I incorporated a lot of history and language and current events at the time. And so that's why the page was kind of covering a lot of different topics, not just Samoan. And so I kind of was going all over the place and but I always wanted to keep within the theme of Samoan language. And so I tried my best to incorporate Samoan language. I was supposed to have developed an online course, which I'm still working on and I'm hoping to launch next year. Um, and so that's one of the main goals of the page is to um, create a space to learn not just Samoan, but everything Samoan. I was doing uh, way too much with all this, with the little time that I have that I have. And so when I would travel different events, I would try to cover as much um, and try to incorporate a lot of different Samoan concepts and different Samoan vocabulary. So for a lot of the different posts, you would see some of the words being translated, some of the concepts being translated. But I kind of wanted it to model it after a lot of different projects. Um, I was supposed to have done a radio program. I was one of the many different projects that was associated with doing the work that I was doing. I kind of got overwhelmed. Um, and so all kind of being related to language revitalization. And so one of the concepts that I wanted to develop with the page was, um, it's interesting because I initially started off doing primarily language work and then it kind of turned into journalism a little bit. And so I was trying to do reporting at the same time in some way. And I actually done a couple different grant programs, and one of the requirements was to actually do reporting in some way. And so I wanted to develop a lot of different media that will kind of address different issues with the whole goal of, to promote Samoan language learning. And so eventually getting out that class, hopefully within the next couple months. Um, we'll post an announcement on the page. But yeah, so that's how the page kind of came about. There's so much more to do with it, but it's all to support um my Samoan language projects, of which the immersion school um that is one of the major projects. So eventually I wanted to have this support the Samoan immersion school project. Um yeah, and also wanted to leverage social media because it's been really popular with the target audience, which is young people, especially young families, because I know that there are a lot of families that are wanting to learn Samoan and to have their students learn the language. So I'm trying to convince people um, to invest in schools. So I know that there are a lot of different programs, and it primarily is, I think, performing arts. Um, it's a big um, thing that's coming out. There are a lot of dance groups that are coming out in the communities. But for me, I wanted to emphasize the language. So part of the reason why I want to create Um, it's a little bit ambitious, but I wanted to create a network of Samoan immersion schools throughout the United States. And so kind of following our, our, our diaspora communities um, in the US. So I've been tracking some of the different communities that have a lot of Samoans.
Oh,
And
yes. So, oh,
yeah,
very quickly, because that's one of the questions that has come in. So,
mhm.
where are the Samoan, the largest concentrations of Samoans in the United States? So I know that there's some in Hawaii, some in the West Coast, in like California in certain areas, but can you let us know sort of where are some of the big population centers? Like if you were thinking about your dream about Samoan schools, like if you could pick three or four places, where would they be?
The top three are California. I think they have 60 to 70,000 right now. California, Hawaii, and I think Washington is the third. Washington, Utah, and then Texas. So surprisingly, in the 2020 census, I think Nevada was number five, but Texas is now number five. Um, and I know because my sisters and their kids moved up to Texas. There's a growing population of Texas, also Pacific Islanders in Texas. I know that Hawaiians are number one, and then Chamorros, and then Samoans in Texas. So hopefully we'll eventually get a school out in Texas. Um, uh, if we develop up of a pilot school here in American Samoa. So currently, right now, I've been planning to do uh, a pilot school in Hawaii, um, in Kalihi. So that's where our current test site is going to be. So we've been working with um, one of the interesting things about American Samoa is that we have a government office in Hawaii. And so this is kind of related to, I know, sorry, didn't really get a chance to talk about the the cases, but I feel it's all related. Because American Samoa is, I mean, I kind of address some of this in the film. Our political status is different from the rest of the territories. Um, like the other territories, we are unincorporated, right? The Constitution doesn't fully apply here. Um, and we're the only territory that's unorganized, meaning that we don't have an organic map. So our government wasn't established by Congress, passing an organic debt. Um, our funding documents are these things called the deeds of cession. So back in 1900, there was a, a deed or instrument of cession that was drafted, and it was signed by our chiefs that would basically put our put American Samoa under U.S. control. And so one of the things that kind of distinguishes American Samoa from the rest of the territory is that we control our own immigration. So like how they say that you don't need a passport to go into different states and territories. In American Samoa, you actually need a passport. Part of the reason is because uh, going back to the deed of cession, or even our constitution, right? Um, we would control our own borders. And so that means, so sorry, that would mean that ICE or INS, so Immigration and Customs, those federal agencies don't have any jurisdiction in American Samoa. Um, so that's one of the interesting things about our territory that a lot of people don't also actually realize. Um, and so
Oh,
I don't
yes.
know, yeah,
Actually,
I
let's
think,
let's let's bring in your film. Let's talk about your film in the time that we have left, because you're already bringing it up now. And so
yeah, so just,
through
okay, that's fine.
the yes. And so here we go. I found this article online. 1 second. two local filmmakers seeking thoughts on opinions on birthright citizenship. I think, is this the one that, yes, this is when I think you were preparing to do your film. And so hold on, let me just share it. So the film is called Not a US Citizen. Produced through Firelight Media, right? Through their homegrown program. And what you're investigating it, as you were just mentioning, is that issue of the fact that American Samoa US nationals, and that you have your own distinct separate relationship that is different than. And so sometimes it's that what is Guam, for example, is a organized unincorporated territory, and they say that American Samoa is a unorganized unincorporated territory and stuff like that that comes from the United States. But that, that because of the deeds of secession, or is that the right word? Because of those deeds, that it's akin to like a treaty relationship between the people of Samoa and the United States, which then, as you were saying, makes it so that you have some control over your borders. You have the right to control land that other people in the territories do not have, with the exception of the people in the CNMI who have some control because of their covenant with the United States. They have land alienation, for example, that only people who are considered to be Northern Marianas descent can own land in their islands, but the rest of the territories don't have anything like that. And so, but as you were mentioning, there are people in the Samoan diaspora who have been bringing cases, right, to try to bring out to try to basically compel citizenship, to kind of bring out that the people in American Samoa will become U.S. citizens, to extend the power and authority of the United States to the islands, and that your film talks about this issue, but then also talks about how it might lead to loss of sovereignty, loss of culture. And so, can you talk to? And this is a film that you co-directed with another filmmaker, right?
Yeah, so Gabby or Gabrielle Fayuaso, she's the director. And so we worked on this film for the last year with Firelight. So I just wanted to um, shout out or thank Firelight for the opportunity for last year to work on this film. Uh, yeah, so we kind of wanted to really talk about American Samoa, um, because a lot of content, especially like in academia, it's always been, outsiders kind of talking about our territory or our people. Um, it's so just bring it up really quickly. And so like our political status, even though we're U.S. territory, um, like we kind of conceptualize ourselves as a nation. Um, and so we have this word atunu, atunu. Um, so it's in English, it's translated as country or a nation, which is interesting because why would you say we're a country or a nation, even though we're U.S. territory? Um, but it's also referred to as a people. Um, so we in American Samoa kind of consider ourselves our own nation. Well, sorry, that's the English word, but in the Samoan, it makes much more sense. It's kind of similar to like the Hawaiian word Lahui, um, which refers to people as a nation instead of the whole nation state paradigm, which is what we're so used to. Right? When we talk about sovereignty and self-determination, it's always been to strive towards nationhood in terms of the nation state. Right? Like in Samoa, Samoa is an independent nation state, and also I guess so. talk about American Samoa. Um, so for most American Samoans, our relationship with the United States is much different than other places, like for example in Hawaii. Um, because of our colonial history, it wasn't um, as drastic, or it wasn't. We didn't go through all those different uh, forms of colonization, including genocide and sort of colonialism. A lot of Samoans are loyal to the United States in ways that other indigenous peoples might look at us like, "Oh, why are you loyal to the colonizers for?" Well, partly because the diversity in experiences, especially in terms of colonization. A lot of Samoans are in the military. Well, we have one of the highest per capita enlistment rates. And part of the reason is because the United States didn't, and I'm sorry, in reference to land, they didn't occupy, they didn't alienate a lot of the land. So once you alienate the land, it kind of really disrupts everything, like the language and culture, and families. So one of the things that kind of distinguishes American Samoa in our context is that most of the land is still under native control. More than 90% of the land is still controlled by Samoans. And so that's the reason why this issue about citizenship is a little bit tricky. Um, whatever the realities are um, that might result from, you know, becoming US citizens. Sorry, I'm going all over the place. So one of the other things that makes Samoans unique is that we're the only US territories in which people are not born as US citizens. Um, it's a really long and complex issue. Since with the sort of cases, this is a whole different topic. Um, but if you're born in American Samoa, you're not automatically a citizen. Um, you're you have this. So like in our passport, you would say like in the back of the passport, we are not US. So this is where the title comes from, not a US citizen. Um, so when I was born, I had a passport, and in the back it would say, the bearer of this passport is a United States national and not a United States citizen. And so only people who were born in American Samoa would have this kind of passport. So not only people would really understand. And so like in the other territories, right, the reason why people were born as US citizens is because they have organic acts that kind of also brought along citizenship. And so in summary, a lot of people in American Samoa don't want US citizenship, automatic US citizenship. It's tied to a lot of different issues. The most prominent issue is the land ownership. So the land laws in American Samoa, you have to be 50% Samoan to own most land, communal land. And so that's the major concern here. Is what would be the result of the land ownership system? Would it be in jeopardy if we were automatic US citizens? And so that's where the whole debate was, is centered in the film. And so you have a group of people from the outside who were born in American Samoa. So when they move to the States, right, they don't have US citizenship. They can't vote in US elections. They can't hold certain jobs. And so that's where the whole issue. Sorry, we didn't have enough time to talk about it, but yeah, it's a really long and complex issue. Funny, a different topic, but yeah, it's all related to our land rights. Going back to another thing, like I guess we could end with this is that American Samoa's, because the U.S. Constitution doesn't fully apply here, right? Like, this is why we are able to have a lot of our our land laws being preserved because of the racial restrictions, but also because we have our chiefly system, and so a lot of these are have been argued as having racial requirements. We know some people have debated with, but it's it's interesting because in our constitution, our land is protected in addition to our culture, our chiefly system, and our language. So all of this is enshrined in our constitution, which at times could be in conflict with the U.S. Constitution. Sorry, I know you're out of time. Let's
No, no. Thank you
keep
for
it.
sharing. Thank you for sharing this. We can continue for a few more minutes. Um, this is such an important perspective to hear because I think especially because the you just had an election in American Samoa. We just had elections in Guam. The United States just had elections. And so, the United States is figuring out what direction it wants to go. And the thing is that one thing that people in Guam feel frustrated about is if you are a Democrat or a Republican, whatever you are, there we don't have any we don't have any ability to uh either support or insulate ourselves from whatever the United States is doing. We are just being dragged along for the ride. And so if we love what America is doing, I guess that's good then. But if we are worried about what America is doing, it sucks. We are stuck because, but, and so we didn't get to choose this. We didn't get to, no one asked the Chamorro people what they really wanted. Those who advocated for US citizenship did so when the United States was taking thousands of families' lands for military bases. And they hoped that if they were US citizens, then the US military would stop taking their lands. And it didn't work. It didn't work. And so it's and so hearing this perspective is important because, for us in Guam, we're especially as we face issues of what happens next in terms of a new administration coming into the United States and what will happen with China, Taiwan, North Korea, the United States, all of these different things. And we are right on the edge of that. And so it is actually nice to hear about American Samoa, where the people there have rights, where they actually have some ability to say that they can enjoy some of the benefits of the United States, but that the United States does not get to dictate everything, or that somebody from the United States does not get to move into American Samoa and buy up all the land and build their giant McMansion wherever they want. And so it's an important perspective because I think for those of us in other territories where thinking that the only way ahead for the longest time is just to bring in more of the United States, that's the way that you advance and progress, is just to Americanize more. It's important to hear from those who see things differently. So that's why I appreciate you putting it out there and saying, you know, we worry about if with US citizenship, what would it mean in terms of land ownership? What would it mean in terms of all of these things? Those are important conversations. And yes, and the relationship between those in the islands and those in the diaspora. Oh, so yes, thank you for that. And I I do want to, I think we should bring you back next year for another conversation, especially if you do your class and you've got, more to talk about. We should definitely bring you back. But I want to offer you a chance to share some final perspective or some final thoughts, and it could be about the political situation, the political status, the film, or it could be about language and culture, whatever you'd like to share. But just take a few minutes if you'd like, and then share some things, uh, whatever you'd like.
Just wanted to thank you, Dr. Prawako, for this opportunity. I know we share a lot of different goals, especially not just in terms of the political realm and taking up our own communities, and but also standing in solidarity with each other. One of our communities, um, um, we haven't been as active in those conversations, and I think a lot of our people are becoming more aware of the issues, especially within this recent election. I think a lot of people are eager for change, but also uh, just want to be more informed of what's going on. In relation to language, I think it's an important part of our identity, especially as a people, as a nation. And then language is tied to everything, right? Like how we talk about being politically active and being informed of everything going on. Um, I think it's important to learn about other communities and the issues that they're also dealing with and ways we can, move in solidarity with each other. Because we're all facing similar issues. We don't know what the political outcomes will be within the next decades. We're often left out of those conversations, especially since it's territories we don't hold the full rights as other states. So we often get left out of those conversations. But I'm hopeful, right, that we continue to have these conversations and um, that we become more informed. We're also engaging in more dialogue, especially across our territories. I'm really thankful for this opportunity to talk with you as well and the podcast for American Samoans. Um, we don't get as much exposure as other territories, so I was thankful for the opportunity. Um, and then for this particular issue for the American Samoans, I know it's a really sensitive issue as well. We've tried to be respectful of both sides in dealing with the issue because we know that it does affect our people in the homeland and in the diaspora as well. We see ourselves, um, as a nation, as a Natulu that isn't bounded by these, borders. But that we see ourselves as a people, as a nation, across borders, and across boundaries. And so, I think very hopeful, especially with all the work that other people are doing within their own circles and even in, not just in academia, but in the community as well, with their political work as well. Their that we have our dialogue and conversations with other Pacific Islanders and also other Indigenous peoples and other peoples who are facing similar struggles that we have. And just wanted to thank everybody for patience and allowing for the space to share with everyone. Wanted to thank in particular Firelight and PBS for providing the opportunity to share our our stories, especially with the broader American community. Um, I'm hoping that we will get to engage more in future conversations, and definitely excited for all the different opportunities that are coming up. We'll definitely stay in touch, and then we'll update everything on the page, especially in regard to the Samoan language classes. Um, yeah, and then I wanted to thank you, Dr. Bavako, for your work as well. I do follow Grandpa's and the podcast, and I'm really excited for your work as well. Um, yeah, so I wish everybody well. If you guys have any other questions, or also if you guys are also interested in collaborating, you are also open to having those conversations as well. Outside.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. remember that you can follow John. You can find John on his Learn Samoan page on Instagram. It is an amazing resource for culture, for history, for language. Um, I have learned so much from that page, and then I have learned so much from just this conversation today. And so I look forward to many more conversations with you, but I appreciate you coming on to the podcast today. And I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Si Zeus Masino Hamsu Todos, ni Umeega, Parume Ekungok Esti I Finakwestin episode Fanachu.